So my name is Mark Berger, and like I said, I've been a certified Bitcoin professional um, since 2019, and um, and I really love teaching people about Bitcoin. And I find that for people to really appreciate what makes Bitcoin special, it really takes an understanding of money and what money is. Um, But money is something that we're all born into, and we don't really understand it because we're like fish in a fishbowl, and we don't realize that we're actually swimming in water. And that's the way money is like in our culture. We all use money every day, um, practically every day, but we don't really understand what it is. So I like to give a good understanding of the history of money and where money comes from, and why do we use money. So let me just get this. Okay. Let me get the screen share. Okay, great. Can we all see the screens? Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. So this is just a summary of what we're going to be talking about today. And please, if anyone has a question, just pipe up. You don't have to raise your hand necessarily because I don't have a moderator or anything. So just pipe up if you have a question, and we can have a little discussion because someone else might be having the same question. And the topics are basically, we're going to be talking about money, like I said, and we're going to be looking at what are the properties of money, why do we use money in the first place, what has been money in the past, and really try to get a definition for what makes money valuable and why do we use money. And then we'll be talking about some of the problems of our current monetary system, which most of us are familiar with in the form of inflation and in money printing. And then we'll get into the properties of Bitcoin and really explain how Bitcoin solves some of these problems that we have with our current monetary system, which is really what gives Bitcoin its unique value proposition. It's not like any other investment that we've seen in the past, and it requires really an open mind to understand Bitcoin because it's like nothing that we've seen before. And I really think it's a very important innovation in the history of humanity and in civilization. So why don't we jump in? So we really have to open our mind, like I said, as to what is money, because we think we understand money. All of us use money to pay our bills, and it obviously works when we show our money to a store or we show our credit card online. We get things in return. So money seems to work for us. And so we think we understand money. But we really need to throw away what we thought we understood about money into something a little broader, into some new ideas about what money is, not just buying things and trading things, although that's a very important use of money itself. So again, this is talking about our insular nature of what we think money is. If we're a fish living in a fishbowl, we have a really hard time understanding what water is because we're surrounded by it 24/7. And all of us have been born into a monetary system which was not of our creation and is really designed to steal from us from the very beginning. Unless you were born before 1913, and I don't think too many people are alive today who are 110 years old, really understand what money used to be before we had this fiat system created by central banks around the world. So there used to be a system of money that was more of a sound money system with hard money rather than the soft money system that's created by government dictate that we have today. So we've got to get out of these ideas that we've been swimming around, we've been living in our whole lives, and it's very difficult to have this new perspective. And Bitcoin forces us to have a new perspective on money. So let's talk about just money in the first place. Why do we use money? Because we could all just be trading with each other back and forth. Right, so Tanya grows some squash, I grow some cilantro, and we can trade back and forth. Okay, I'll give you so many bunches of cilantro, and you give me maybe a zucchini or a squash. So we've got like maybe a 5-to-1 exchange rate in terms of bunches of cilantro to a squash. And then Tanya could have an exchange rate with Robin. Okay, I'm going to trade my zucchini for maybe 5 of her avocados. And this barter system is actually very efficient. It works very well. The problem with the barter system is when we have multiple things that we want to trade and we want to get for ourselves. So all of a sudden, if we want to continue this barter system, we have to have an exchange rate for every type of an exchange for every one of these products that we want to acquire for ourselves. And this can work maybe if you have 5 or 10 products, but it starts to multiply very quickly in these exponential exchange rates, which we have for all different products and services that we want to acquire for ourselves. And this is the math that shows how convoluted and how complex it can be if we're on a barter system. So if you have 2 items, okay, we have 1 exchange rate, 6 items, 15 exchange rates, 500 items, over 100,000 exchange rates, and things break down really quickly. All of a sudden, we start spending all of our time and energy just figuring out exchange rates between things that we want to acquire for ourselves. And of course, this is all solved by a central currency. Currently, if you live in the United States, it's the US dollar. If you're in Canada, it's the Canadian dollar. And this is the central thing that we all can base the price of everything else that we want to acquire. So it's cilantro, it's squashes, it's avocados. We all have a single number, a single currency that we can count and we can compare. And this is the price of everything. So this is a very useful thing. The economist John Kenneth Galbraith told me when I asked him about money, what he thought about money, he told me money. It's a very useful thing. And it's true. Money is very useful because it gets us out of this complicated barter system and allows us to grow our economy. One of the problems that we have with our current monetary system is that we don't have a world currency. The dollar is dominant, but we have the yen, we have the euro, we have the British pound, we have the Canadian dollar. And we do have a currency trader in our midst here today. And they know very well how we have exchange rates between all these different currencies. And then all these currencies have exchange rates for the products that we want to sell. And it gets to be very complicated. And not only that, these individual currencies are controlled by individual governments. And when these governments have fights with each other, they may not accept the currency of the other country. Or if you're a citizen of a country, that government can lock down your ability to use that currency, which is what we saw in Canada a couple of years ago during the truckers' strike. So these centralized currencies of the countries, we have a number of different problems with them. Again, now we have multiple currencies, and so we have multiple exchange rates. And this is a great inefficiency in the world monetary system where we have to have these exchange rates between currencies. So Bitcoin is one of the possible solutions that we have for this problem of a world currency. Now let's talk a little bit about what are the properties of money in general. Over history, we've seen that money has 5 distinct properties. One is that it's scarce. It's hard to find the stuff that we use as a currency. In seafaring cultures, they generally had rocks from mountains. In mountainous cultures, they had shells from the sea. And it was very hard to acquire more of these things that they used as a central currency to trade amongst each other. And in the past, we've used gold. Gold is very hard to find. It's provably rare in the Earth's crust. So gold was a very useful thing. Divisibility, being able to split up these units of account is very important. So if I gave you a cow as payment, it's really hard to cut up that cow if the cow is still alive. Large things like a house. A house is not very good as a money because you can't really give someone your bedroom or your kitchen. It doesn't break off very easily. So you got to have something that you're able to split up. So if you have small units like shells or small rocks, there's many of them, and you can give them around, you can split them up. Even something like gold or silver, you can actually melt it down and give you small pieces of gold and silver, and that acts as nice small coins. Portability, another feature of money. It's really nice to be able to hand somebody or take that money a great distance, be able to take it to a new country, be able to take it to the store. Can't exactly take a cow very easily. Can't take your house, certainly. So it's nice to have it to be able to put it into your hand, to be able to carry it with you wherever you go. Durability, the fourth property of money. It has to be able to last over time. Now, a cow is really nice, but a cow is eventually going to die. Food is really nice to barter with, but food goes rotten after a while, unless it's honey, which is the only food that I know of that keeps its life shelf for a very long time. But almost everything else in the food category, it withers over time. This makes gold a very useful form of money because gold, it doesn't degrade at all. It doesn't tarnish at all. Silver does tarnish, however. So that's why gold is seen as superior to silver historically. And then the final property of money is that it's recognized by people as valuable, as having these other four properties. So it's interesting, actually. If you go to a man on the street and you say, "Hey, I have a gold bar, or actually a silver bar of 1 ounce, and I have a Hershey's bar. Which would you like?" 9 people out of 10 would actually take the Hershey bar, even though the Hershey bar is maybe only worth $2 and a silver ounce is currently worth about $25. Most people will take the Hershey's bar simply because they have greater recognition of the value of a Hershey's bar rather than a piece of silver. So recognizability is a very important facet of having something being money. And this chart or this diagram that's in front of you here, it shows you the various properties of the various things that could be considered money. And the colors are associated with the 5 properties that I showed there. And Bitcoin's in the middle. And a lot of these things can be used as money, but they're not lacking. But they're lacking in some of the 5 properties of money. Bitcoin is very, very good in all of the properties of money, particularly the first 4. They're superior to all the other forms of money that we see in the world. The only thing that it's currently lacking a little bit is in recognizability. Not everyone currently recognizes the value of Bitcoin itself, but over time, this is growing. And I think over time, we are going to see Bitcoin as being probably the world reserve currency. And that's just my opinion as to where we're going here, because Bitcoin satisfies all the properties of money that we've traditionally used for money, and it's even better. And we'll get into why it's better. So just to review again, back in the old days, before really civilization was spread around the globe, we used things like stones, seeds, shells from the ocean. These were primitive forms of money because they satisfied the 5 properties of money in our cultures. And then as we got more advanced, we were able to mine precious metals out of the ground, and gold and silver became a very common and worldwide recognized store of value. It was portable, it was divisible, and it was precious. So gold and silver kind of became a worldwide de facto system of money. And then something very important in the history of money came around because in order to pay someone in gold and silver, you actually had to take it to them. And when you wanted to go, say, 50 miles away and pay, for instance, a dowry to buy your son a wife, back in the old days, in some cultures that was a custom. Giving a bag of gold to pay for a wife, you would have to take that gold physically to the town or to the country, and you'd have to travel, usually in a stagecoach or in a horse, and you'd have to travel back then what was known as the highways. And this is when people would get robbed of their gold or their silver, and this is how we get the term highway robbery. Is when you're trying to take gold or silver somewhere and you would get robbed. And so this was a big problem. Security was a big problem. Well, someone figured out if you actually could deposit and keep your gold and silver in a safe place, maybe in a fort, surrounded by defenses and armed men with spears or bows and arrows, a place that was very hard to break into, a place that you could keep something very secure. What you could do then is you could deposit this gold and silver, and then the owner of that fort or of that stronghold would then write you a piece of paper and say, "Here, you have 2 ounces of gold, or you have 3 bars of silver, or what it is, and I'll give you this paper, this receipt for your deposit. And this was much easier because then you don't have to necessarily transport the gold, and you could stash this little piece of paper in a small place. It's very hard to detect. And it was much easier to transport these pieces of paper instead of the gold. And so this is actually how we started getting bills of paper to be used as money. And this is actually what most of the old money was backed by. It was actually backed by this gold kept in a stronghold somewhere that could then be redeemed for the gold. And then we got into the government issued money, which was backed by gold. And as we'll see, eventually we left this gold-backed money system. And now we don't really have anything backing our US dollars or our Canadian dollars. It's just by the full faith and credit of the government that the government is actually going to preserve the value of this paper. And then Bitcoin, we get into something called proof of work, which we'll get into later about how Bitcoin works and how Bitcoin are created. But this shows you some of the problems historically of keeping your valuables safe in this form of money, and how it's evolved too. So one of the big problems of money in the past is that governments they inflate the value of the money. They debase the physical currency. And what this diagram shows is how gold coins would actually have chips taken out of them back in the day. The emperors in Rome would actually sliver out pieces of gold and silver coins to actually take out the silver and the gold, because sometimes these emperors, they would not have enough money to go to war or to do other things they would want to do. And they needed to find the money, but they couldn't just create gold or silver out of thin air because, well, no one knows how to create gold and silver out of thin air. You actually had to have the gold and silver if you wanted to pay your army, if you wanted to pay your soldiers to go and invade somewhere or go take a new city-state. So they actually shaved the coins, and that was actually devaluing the value of those coins. Today, we have a similar process where the government inflates away, takes away the value of our money. And that's through the printing press. As we've probably all heard about, governments around the world have been printing a tremendous amount of money, especially during the COVID years, where they printed trillions of dollars, and they destroyed the value of the dollar. And inflation is here today. If we all go to the supermarket, we see the extraordinary prices for some of the things that we like to buy every day. And our dollars just don't have the value anymore. So today our governments use the printing press just to create money out of thin air. And this is a big problem for us as savers. How do we store our wealth? How do we preserve the value of our hard-earned money when we work? This is a problem for everybody. So this isn't just for rich people. This is for anybody who works, anyone who likes to save money. And so this diagram actually shows that dollar bills were actually convertible into gold. Amazingly enough, you could actually take dollar bills into a bank and say, I want gold. Take my $10, take my $100, and give me gold back. The dollars were actually redeemable for gold. And this was standard. This was considered a sound money system. But problems began when governments started wanting to do more than they actually had the gold to procure what the services or the things that they wanted to buy. So in August of 1971, President Nixon said, temporarily, we are going to end the gold, the backing of gold of the dollars, and you can no longer take gold for your dollars. Again, this was temporary, and we are still to this day living under a temporary lifting of the gold convertibility window. And you might be wondering, why did this happen in 1971, in the summer of 1971? Well, in the late 60s, President Johnson, the president before Nixon, he had embarked on a very ambitious domestic agenda, which was known as guns and butter. President Johnson wanted to have a war in Vietnam, the guns, and he also wanted to have something called the Great Society, where he lifted millions of people out of poverty, primarily in the South, provide electricity, provide sanitation, uplift millions of people, millions of Americans into a more standard, uplifting life. And so this policy was known as guns and butter. But the problem is that the US government was running out of money, was running out of gold. And everyone could see this because the budget is actually, it's a public record of how much money the government spends. And so France, I believe, actually wanted to trade their dollars that they held in their treasury for gold. And so France said, you know what, we'd actually like to trade our dollars for gold. Could you send us the gold? And well, that caused a real problem. And so to get around this problem, because we really didn't want to give up our gold, or we didn't have enough gold to give the French, President Nixon said, well, for the time being, we're going to lift the gold standard right now. And ever since then, there is nothing backing the United States dollar except the full faith and credit of the government itself. So this was a very important moment in monetary history, and probably very few of us remember when it happened. So we don't have much history of this. So in the past, we had this gold standard. For the last 50 or so years, we've had this dollar standard, this fiat, or this dictated standard of what money is. It's just dictated by the government. And in the future, I can see something that is like gold from the past, but is a modern upgrade on the gold standard, which I think will be a Bitcoin standard, because Bitcoin cannot be created out of thin air. It is scarce, and we'll get into why. And it keeps everybody honest. It's a sound money system. It can't just be created willy-nilly by our governments, or by anyone for that matter. So let's get into actually just what a scam is, because I think our current fiat system is really a scam of the highest order. And the dictionary definition is simply a dishonest way to take money from people by deceiving them. And that's exactly what I think our fiat system is, because over time, we lose purchasing power of our dollars, or our Canadian dollars, because prices rise and we're able to buy less. And yet this is perfectly legal in the system that we live in. Now, the current target rate of inflation from the Federal Reserve Bank is 2%. But if the inflation rate is kept at 2%, the value of your dollar is cut in half every 36 years. And right now, inflation is far from 2%. It's probably running in the United States around 6 or 7%. In Canada, probably 8, 10%. And in Europe, I think it's 12 or 15%. So you're losing the value of your money that you're holding even faster. And this is how the governments actually steal from everybody, everyone who's holding money, everyone who has assets held in money. We're trying to keep up. We're trying to find a way to beat inflation. That's the whole reason why we are supposedly investing, because we have to beat inflation. But inflation itself is a scam. It's a theft of our value. And yet it's perfectly legal. And I think this is a big problem with the world today. And yet this is just the world that we've grown up in. This is the world that we live in. This is the water that we as fish swim in. And it's really hard to see unless you go to the grocery store sometimes and you see how expensive things have gotten. And then you're like, whoa, this is a real problem. So this graph here just shows the devaluation of the dollar over time since the Federal Reserve was first created in 1913. And since that time, we've lost something like 98% of the purchasing power of our dollars. And so much money has been created during the COVID pandemic. Something like $3 or $4 trillion was just created in the last few years. And that's what's created the inflation that we see, prices rising everywhere, because there's more and more dollars out there fighting for the same amount of products and services, basically. This is what creates inflation. And don't let anyone tell you differently, that it's greedy corporations or it's selfish consumers buying too much. The only thing that creates inflation is government money printing. That is the #1 source by far of inflation. And when the government prints money, we get a tremendous amount of inflation. We're not on a sound money system. This is the system that we were almost all of us were born into. And this is really, really a problem. Even if you never buy Bitcoin, you need to be aware of this. So let's talk about Bitcoin. Again, we want to open up our minds and think about Bitcoin as another animal itself. It's not a company because nobody owns Bitcoin as a whole. Nobody controls Bitcoin as a whole. No one gets to say how many Bitcoin are created. It's actually written into computer code that anyone can look at, open up the ledger and take a look at what's going on. And Bitcoin is it's not technically a commodity that comes out of the earth like oil or gold is. And so we have to think about it as something different, something new. And again, like I said, it's sort of like gold, but a new version of gold that has some advantages to it. So let's talk about what Bitcoin is now that we understand the problems of our current monetary system and potentially how could Bitcoin fix some of these problems. So like I said, Bitcoin is not controlled by any individual or any company or any government. No bank can control it. No person can control it. No foundation can control it. Anyone can participate in it. It doesn't matter if you're Black, if you're white, if you're Hispanic. Doesn't matter if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim. Doesn't matter if you live in Russia. Doesn't matter if you live in Venezuela. Doesn't matter if you live in Canada. Anyone can participate in this. It's truly, truly democratic. Not only that, but you can send Bitcoin to anybody, anywhere in the world without any restrictions. And nobody can tell you that you can't send your Bitcoin anywhere to anyone else. So it's completely open, not controlled by any central entity, controlled by the users themselves. And anyone can participate to anyone in the world without any restrictions. So again, getting into some of the properties that make it advantageous to hold and to use Bitcoin. It's completely decentralized. And this is hard to understand because we live in a centralized money system. We live in centralized banking system. No one can take your Bitcoin if you properly secure it. You don't have to rely on a third party, on some website, on some company, on some physical location. This can be held in your hand, actually, the keys to your Bitcoin, and no one can take them. So it's a very powerful thing. It's actually the first unconfiscatable asset in the world. No one can take your Bitcoin if you properly hold it in your hands, if you properly stored the keys to your Bitcoin. It's a very, very powerful property that the world has never seen before, actually, because someone could take your house. Government could take your house. Government could come and freeze your bank account. Government could come into your house and take your artwork, take your diamonds, take your gold. No one can take your Bitcoin. Maybe they could kill you, yes, but they can never take your Bitcoin. Truly a revolutionary property of Bitcoin. Something else is that the ledger is transparent. It's completely an open book, although it is not, names are not associated with the Bitcoin transactions, but numbers are associated with these transactions. So we can all see what's going on. There's no hiding of secret transactions necessarily. And we also know the issuance rate of Bitcoin. So in 50 years, all of us can know exactly how many Bitcoin exist in the world. In 50 years, do we know if the US dollar will even exist? In 50 years, do we have any idea how much gold would be in circulation? We have no idea of these things. There could be an asteroid that is brought back to Earth by Elon Musk, and this asteroid contains trillions of ounces of gold. We don't really know for certain how much gold will be around. By contrast, we know with absolute certainty how many Bitcoin will be in existence 50 years from now because it's written into the code. And this code is open source. Anybody can look at the code and verify for themselves at any point in time exactly how many Bitcoin will be in issuance. So it's a very powerful and open and democratic system. My next point, it's truly democratic. Anyone can participate, like I said. And for the first time, we have money separate from the state. There is no central issuing organization. There's no one to say what is a valid transaction, who is a valid account holder. It's completely open. It's permissionless. You don't need to ask anyone permission. As long as you're alive and you can hold your keys, you can participate in the Bitcoin network and participate in its benefits. And then finally, I'd like to say that it's conservative. Not conservative in a liberal conservative political way, but it's conservative in that Bitcoin actually preserves its value and actually increases its value over time. And this is the exact opposite of the way our current monetary system works. If you hold your money, it slowly loses its value, right? That's what inflation does. It takes away the value of our currency. It buys less and less over time. Bitcoin is the exact opposite of this. It actually appreciates over time. It's designed to appreciate over time because over time, less and less Bitcoin are being created. Bitcoin is created every 10 minutes through a block subsidy by miners, and we'll get into the details of this. When Bitcoin was first established, there were 50 Bitcoin generated every 10 minutes. After 4 years, this subsidy was cut in half, and 25 Bitcoin were generated every 10 minutes. 4 years later, this subsidy was cut in half again to 12 and a half, or 12 and a quarter Bitcoin are created every 10 minutes. Currently, 6 1/8 Bitcoin are created every 10 minutes. And in April, we're going to have another halvening, we call it. The block subsidy will get cut in half again. So less and less of this Bitcoin is being created over time. And that is what gives its intrinsic scarcity and its appreciation. It's actually dramatic appreciation over time. It's not an accident that the value of Bitcoin has actually skyrocketed in 13 years. It's actually designed, it was designed that way. This is not an accident. This is not a bubble. Like people say, oh, this is like the tulip mania in the Netherlands in the 18th century or whenever it was. This is not like the South Sea land bubble. This is not like the Florida swamp bubble. This is not like Beanie Babies from the 80s. This is actually a designed scarce asset. It's designed to appreciate over value. And so when you have an asset that is appreciating over time, you want to hold on to it, right? Why would you ever want to trade an appreciating asset for something that depreciates, like a car? A car, it eventually wears out. You have maintenance with it. But with Bitcoin, you're actually holding something that holds its value and grows in value over time. So that's what I mean by it being conservative. Maybe I should stop here. I haven't heard any questions. Any questions? Mike? No? Okay. Well, I will continue then. Okay. So why was Bitcoin created in the first place? Well, the creator of Bitcoin goes by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, Satoshi Nakamoto is anonymous now, and Satoshi Nakamoto doesn't communicate anymore. We really don't know who Satoshi was, who the creator of Bitcoin was. So we can't ask the creator of Bitcoin, why did you create Bitcoin? So we have to try to use the information that we have at hand. And there are some clues. So when the very first Bitcoin were created on January 3rd, 2009, this title of this article in the Times of London, quote, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. This was actually encoded into the first block of Bitcoin at the very beginning. The first block is known as the Genesis block. So this quote was put into the first block. Now, why do you think this quote, out of all the other quotes of all the other news that was going on that day, was put into the book? Any guesses? Anyone?
Well, because it's money devaluation coming.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Mark. Exactly. So this, to refresh your memory, January 2009, this is in the middle of the great financial crisis when banks were going bankrupt due to the very corrupt mortgages that were being written en masse, particularly in the United States. And people could not afford these mortgages. And so the banks were on the hook for these mortgages, and also pensions were on the hook for the collateralized debt obligations. Mortgages were bundled together and sold to pension funds and insurance companies as a safe investment. It caused a huge financial crisis, and but no banker ever went to jail, went to prison for writing these bad mortgages. Thousands of people lost their homes in the United States for taking on these mortgages. No government official was ever fired or went to prison. And instead, the banks got bailed out, which is exactly what this headline says. So there was corruption going on between the banks, um, the rating agencies of the bonds, and of the government. They're all working together. Government, private institutions working together, basically to defraud the average investor. The pension holder. And to me, when you have the government and private entities working together, that's old school fascism. Private public partnerships is what they call it today, but that is fascism when you have the government and large companies working together to defraud individual investors, savers, people like ourselves. So this headline gives us a strong clue that Bitcoin is in some way a response to this corruption, to this fascism that was running wild in late 2008 and in 2009. And in my opinion, where we're going with this and where we have been going is this is leading to modern day serfdom. What we've seen over the last 50 years is workers' productivity going up, and yet the power of our dollar basically flat, not really appreciating in value. And really, in some cases, really losing value over time, and it forces us to become investors. So Bitcoin, to me, is a way to break this path that we're on of a neo-feudal future. And so Bitcoin has this unique feature where it has all the advantages of our current monetary system and all of the advantages of our previous monetary system, the sound money, gold money system, without any of the disadvantages. So the advantage of our current monetary system is that we can send money around the world really in days, no problem whatsoever. But the problem is we lose the value over time of our dollars, right? That's what inflation is. Over time, we lose the value. It grows less and less valuable if we simply hold our dollars. Gold, on the other hand, it holds its value over time very, very well. And we know this because 1 ounce of gold today basically buys you the same thing as 1 ounce of gold 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years ago, you could have a custom fitted toga in Rome made for you. A man could have a custom fitted toga and it costs 1 ounce of gold. Today, if a man wants a custom fitted suit, they go to Saks Fifth Avenue or they go to the Bay in Canada and they get a custom fitted suit. And it's basically one gold piece, $2,000 is basically what it is. So gold holds its value over time, but how do we send gold around the world? You can't. That's the disadvantage of gold. So Bitcoin, you're able to send Bitcoin to anyone around the world. And also Bitcoin holds its value over time. As we've seen, Bitcoin has grown in value tremendously. So it has the best of our current system and the old monetary system, but none of the disadvantages of these systems. So maybe you're wondering now, how does Bitcoin get created? What is Bitcoin about? Well, I don't really want to get into the technical aspects of Bitcoin too much because it actually combines a whole bunch of different technologies that really require a computer science degree to understand. But I mentioned it briefly before that Bitcoin are created by a computer looking for a random number over and over and over again. That's all it's doing. You may have heard that Bitcoin is actually trying to do complex mathematical calculations. Oftentimes you'll hear that in the media. It's actually not true. All Bitcoin is doing, Bitcoin miners are looking for a specific random number. And once they find that random number, there's an algorithm that proves that it is the number. And then the person or the computer that has found this random number gets the next Bitcoin. And this is done every 10 minutes, nonstop, and it's been going on for 13 years now. And this computer that is able to find this random number is then able to create the next block, which is a ledger, just a ledger of transactions. And these transactions are what allow us to send Bitcoin from an address, from a person to person anywhere around the world, or to a computer to computer anywhere around the world. And this is basically what keeps the network running. And because there's so many people mining Bitcoin and also keeping track of the Bitcoin software, it can't be stopped because Bitcoin is running on my computer. Bitcoin could be running on your computer, and Bitcoin is running on hundreds of thousands of other computers all around the world. And in order to actually kill Bitcoin, you would have to shut down all of these computers everywhere around the world. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have a short document, relatively short, that explains everything on this particular slide that you could provide. I've seen bits and pieces of this all over the place, but I have never seen anything that pulls it together in a simple way. I read the white paper, but the white paper doesn't really, it's more complex than I think what you have here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the white paper is in fact a proposal. But I would go into the specific aspects of it. And I could talk about basically all of these technologies on here, except for Merkle trees, which is kind of beyond my pay grade.
Well, I don't know if you need to do that here. I'm just saying if you had as a follow up, if you have your work, if you've seen something that good, because sometimes people would ask me questions when I start talking this, and now it's all slow.
Yeah.
You see what I'm asking? Well, if you come across something, in the future, maybe that'd be fine.
Okay, I will.
I've been waiting 5 or 6 years. I could wait a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Any other questions now that we're getting sort of into the technical aspects of it or anything like that? Okay, we'll move on then. Yeah, and the proof of work is actually something that makes Bitcoin somewhat unique from most other cryptocurrencies, and that it actually requires computers to actually find this random number. Most other cryptocurrencies, they don't employ any work whatsoever. They're just issued by a person. The coins are issued by a company or a foundation, and there's really no proof of anything. It's more like our current fiat system. Oh, a central authority wants to create more money, well, then they just do so. There's really no rules behind it. And Bitcoin is a system of rules without a ruler, which is actually quite fascinating if you think about it. And the rules are all adopted by consensus. Yeah, Mark again.
Well, is it safe to say that proof of work delineates decentralized versus proof of stake, or what you're talking about delineates centralized? Because you hear that discussion a lot.
Yeah, no, it's true. And in 99% of times, I think that's basically correct. The exception to that is, I would say, is something like Monero, which is proof of work. And we think it's decentralized. And the problem with Monero is that it's not an open ledger. So we don't know. We really don't know how many Monero are being generated every 10 minutes or whatever. We don't know what the block subsidy is, if it's being adhered to, because it's not an open ledger. And that gives its ultimate benefits in terms of ultimate privacy and anonymity, but it's a huge security flaw because we're trusting the Monero miners, actually, that they're adhering to rules. And in Bitcoin, we have consensus mechanism that enforces the rules on the miners. They can't cheat. No one can cheat because we're all looking at the ledger, or our software is looking at the ledger automatically for us and enforcing the rules of the software. Okay. So, do you have to buy one Bitcoin, which is a common thing? So, no. The answer is no. You don't have to buy one Bitcoin. Currently, one Bitcoin is valued at around $26,000. There's actually 100 million units in a single Bitcoin, and we call this one unit a Satoshi, named after the founder of the Bitcoin protocol, also called a sat for short, a sat. So there are 100 million sats, or 100 million Satoshis in a single Bitcoin. Of course, we have cents. We're all familiar with cents, whether they're euros or dollars or whatever they are. So you can see that the Bitcoin network could facilitate enormous growth in the economy. That's one criticism you sometimes hear, is that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin created ever. And that we know this from the code. 21 million Bitcoin is the hard cap of the amount of Bitcoin that will ever be created. So how could you run an economy, a world economy, on only 21 million Bitcoin? Well, if each Bitcoin contains 100 million units, you can see that there's plenty of room for an economy to function and to have enough units to be able to say one Satoshi could eventually be worth 1 cent, no problem. And this slide also shows some of the differences between our traditional monetary system and Bitcoin. So not only do we have many more units per currency, the settlement is also very different. In our current system, we rely upon a central authority, a central bank, which then settles against other banking institutions, the Bank of International Settlements. It's all a central authority, and it's a hub and a spoke system. In Bitcoin, everything is decentralized. There's no central authority to attack. There's no central bank to shut down. There's no central institution to issue more or to say your transaction is no good. We are all equal in the Bitcoin network, literally are quite equal. Also, in the Bitcoin network, the issuance is different, as I said. In the central banking system, we have a committee usually that decides every month what the interest rate is on our money. We have a bank that can block access to your money and say, no, you can't get to your bank account anymore, or we just take your money away. In Bitcoin, this isn't a problem. This is not a problem. The issuance of Bitcoin is written into computer code. We know for a fact how many Bitcoin will ever exist. And we know for a fact if your transactions are going through. And we know that as long as we're adhering to the code, all the rules of Bitcoin will be adhered to. And no one can do anything about it. As long as you are following the consensus of the software, you can participate in the network as much as anyone else. So again, just to review the unique attributes of Bitcoin, it is truly decentralized. There is no central authority with it whatsoever, and that makes it totally unstoppable. No one can shut it down. Government, FBI, CIA, nobody can shut it down. All it takes is 2 people in the world to be running the Bitcoin software, and Bitcoin lives. That's all it takes. Fixed issuance. We know for an absolute fact how many Bitcoin are going to be in existence today. We know exactly how many are going to be in existence 50 or 100 years from now. This is written into the code. And the code is validated and enforced every 10 minutes on the network. This has been running for years, and it hasn't been hacked. There's an enormous incentive to hack it. It's technology. If someone could hack Bitcoin, they would gain billions and billions of dollars. No one's been able to do it. It's extremely secure. It's running, it's being validated by the most powerful computer system in the world by magnitudes, orders of magnitude. No government, no corporation could ever build something like the Bitcoin network. It's too large at this point. It's going to keep running forever. It's open source, meaning anyone can participate. Anyone can look at the code and actually see what's going on. There's no secrets here. Yeah, Mark.
I was just going to point out and make clear, get you to confirm it, is that I've read that because it's been secure for so many years, just like 13, what is it, 14 years now almost, that it's essentially considered unhackable at this point. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I don't like to say anything is impossible, but the fact is there's an enormous incentive to hack Bitcoin, enormous, billions of dollars are at stake, and no one has done it yet. So I think it's pretty safe. There's no such thing as an absolute sure thing. I don't believe in 100% certainty, but as far as risks go, I think that's a very, very, very low risk. I'm not worried about that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So moving on, it's disinflationary by design. So again, Bitcoin is designed to appreciate against our inflating fiat currencies. This is by design. Every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that is issued gets cut in half. So it gets cut in half, the amount of Bitcoin that are created. And by the year 2133, I believe it is, there will be no more Bitcoin created. That'll be it. There'll be no more available. So this is a naturally appreciating asset. This is a naturally conservative asset. This is a naturally disinflationary or deflationary asset. This is something that you want to hold. You want to hold it like your life depends upon it, because this stuff is going to be very hard to get. Actually, it's going to be very hard to get a single Bitcoin. So think about it this way. There are more than 40 million US dollar millionaires in the world. If every one of these US dollar millionaires wanted to get their hands on just one Bitcoin, they would not be able to, because there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in existence. So if you're able to get a hold of one Bitcoin in your lifetime, you will be considered very rich. That is an absolute fact, no doubt about it. Okay. Any questions about that?
Yeah, Mark, I do have a question. If when I look at who's in charge around the world and think about how powerful Bitcoin sounds like it is to give regular people some security, financial security, and there is all of this other power that doesn't want us to have this security. What are the vulnerabilities of Bitcoin, given the fact that there may be others in the world who don't want this particular currency to be available for regular folks? Does it have vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't have vulnerabilities. It can be adopted, or it doesn't have to be adopted, but the one big vulnerability is if there's no more internet. Bitcoin doesn't work very well without an internet. Bitcoin doesn't work very well without electricity. That's a vulnerability. But again, I think, unless there's a complete destruction of our civilization, I think Bitcoin will continue. You have something to say about that, Mark?
Well, I was just going to say that to me, the vulnerability is that the governments declared it illegal. And then when they declared holding gold illegal, people just turned it in. Now, that was a different time and place. And people, I think, were a lot more trusting of the government. But that would still, push a lot of people to turn in their Bitcoin, regardless of whether it's something they wanted to do or not, because they didn't want to get arrested. It'd be very difficult for the government to prove that you even had it if you have it on a hard wallet, which is obviously where it needs to be. So to me, that is a vulnerability. But and that's the one I keep hearing the most about, and I don't have an argument against, because human nature is such that a lot of people would, in fact, turn it in, especially people who aren't, hardcore Bitcoin people.
Right.
I'm curious what you think.
No, you're right. It can be made illegal. And for people who agree with that law, yes, they wouldn't no longer be able to participate. But the government has tried to make a lot of things illegal over the years. Prostitution, alcohol, a lot of drugs. And a lot of these efforts, they may be immoral, but it's really hard to make them illegal.
Well, the other thing is that they close down all the exchanges, and then it makes it virtually very difficult for people to actually exchange their fiat money for Bitcoin. No, you'd have to almost go to one another and say, I'll sell you some Bitcoin if you want.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people working on
Give
that
me
problem
some,
of having
dollars or whatever, euros.
Yeah, there are a lot of people working on that problem. So
you mean outside of exchanges?
yeah,
but you still have to go through the banking system, and that's the problem.
right. So, but there are people working on peer-to-peer exchanges, so you don't have to go to a central authority. And so
But you have to
people
get
are,
in. So you have to get into the crypto first to do the peer-to-peer exchange, because you can't come straight out of your bank account. Is kind of my point.
there are people working on this, and there are
Oh, that too.
peer-to-peer. Yeah, there are peer-to-peer exchanges right now. Like BISC is one, BISQ is a peer-to-peer exchange where there's no third party intermediating between a transaction online, and it can't be shut down. So like the Tor network it's using the Tor network technology, which is it's a sophisticated encryption technology. But yeah, so people are working on this and
Are you
are aware of
saying
the problem.
Are you saying you can go directly from their bank account through something like Tor or BISC to buying? I think that's possible. Oh, cool. That's good news.
Right. Yeah, and they're using tools like Venmo and PayPal and Amazon cards,
Okay.
things like this to exchange. Yeah. So it's not directly from your bank account, but it's one step away through these other platforms. So, but you're right. Government can make Bitcoin uncomfortable to hold, but I don't think governments can stop Bitcoin. But yeah.
So that leads me to another question. Is it traceable? I mean, when we have our credit cards, all of that is traceable.
You're right. That's a good point, Barb. So Bitcoin is pseudonymous, but it's not completely anonymous the way it's used normally. But again, there are people who are aware of this, and some people want complete anonymity. And there is a way to gain complete anonymity with your Bitcoin if that is what you want. There's a small fee to pay. It's about maybe 1% if you want to convert some of your pseudo-anonymous Bitcoin to completely anonymous Bitcoin. You can do that through a technology called coin joins. And I show my clients how to do that if they want.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. All right. Just want to wrap this up. If you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand or just jump in. But the other features of, yeah, Mike.
Yeah, we're trying to get. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we were muted and we were having a little difficulty. So you may have touched on this early on, but on how much Bitcoin is out there. How much has been mined so far?
Yeah, good question. I think we're at about 19,200,000 right now.
Okay, so I just read there's only 21 million out there. I don't know why there's only 21 million. You may have touched on that at the beginning too.
Yeah, no, that's a good.
I'll just jump ahead. So if once it's all mine, there's no more left, doesn't it really just become a commodity?
Yes, it's already considered a commodity by the IRS, by the way.
Right. Oh yeah, you're supposed to report it and they track it now, like 2 years ago on the tax forms.
Right.
I don't know anybody that's reporting it though, since it's voluntary.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So,
So what happens? I mean, we're almost there, right?
well, because the block subsidy is cut in half every 4 years, there'll be new Bitcoin created up until the year 2133, long after we're dead.
Oh, so it's like a stock splitting. So there'll always be 21 million. Is that what I heard?
Well, there will only be 21 million created. Currently in existence, there's 19,200,000 roughly. There's more created every 10 minutes. So there's more being created every 10 minutes, but the hard cap of the total amount of Bitcoin that there will ever be in existence is 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. And we will finally mine the last amount of Bitcoin in the year 2133. So a stock split is actually when you're diluting your shareholders, usually by doubling it. And you should think of the issuance rate of Bitcoin like the gold issuance rate. So every year we have a certain amount of gold that's in existence above the ground, right? Like in the form of coins, bars, jewelry, rings, things like that. And every year we mine and refine about 2% of the total amount of gold that is above ground right now. And so that is known as the stock to flow ratio. And that's 2% for gold. And right now we're at about 2.5% for Bitcoin right now. But after April, we're going down to 1.25% because it's getting cut in half, the issuance rate. So our stock to flow ratio will actually be better than gold's just in a year's time, less than a year's time. And then in another 4 years, it gets cut in half again. So we're dealing with a commodity here that has a smaller stock to flow ratio of gold. The stock to flow ratio of silver is like 8 or 10% a year. And that's why silver is considered less valuable than gold, because so much more silver is being mined every year. And some people have studied this stock to flow ratio and have argued that this is what the intrinsic value is actually of Bitcoin, because the stock to flow ratio, if you chart it, you'll see that the lower stock to flow ratios actually have higher values, and the commodities which have high stock to flow ratios have lower values, right?
Okay.
Might have been more than you wanted to hear. But, thanks for asking.
Um,
Is that Barb? I didn't hear a question. Was there a question?
No, I'm
No.
sorry. Mike was thanking you basically, but I had already put it back on mute. So we're good. Thank you.
Oh, okay. You're welcome.
I'm going to mute us again.
All righty. Glad you know how to do it now. And then it's the last attribute of it. It's the unconfiscatability of it, which is what I emphasized earlier. The first asset, the first commodity in the history of the world, which cannot be taken from you without your permission. If you store it correctly, nobody in the world can take it from you. You have to give your permission. And I think this is a really interesting attribute because, getting permission from people is sort of the foundation of a just civilization. You can't arbitrarily, by force anyone to do anything, to give your Bitcoin up. And when you have to ask permission from people, you get a more cooperative culture, you get a more cooperative civilization. And I think this is enormously important for our civilization moving forward. So a question that I get a lot about Bitcoin is like, well, how is this different from all the other cryptos? Bitcoin is just one of 1,000, one of them 10,000 cryptocurrencies. What makes Bitcoin special? Well, as Mark alluded to earlier, Bitcoin is truly the only decentralized cryptocurrency. 99% of all the cryptocurrencies are centralized. They are controlled by a person, a founder. They are controlled by a company looking to make money. or they're controlled by a foundation looking to so-called do good while having a staff, a paid staff. Or of course, they're controlled by a government, and governments are starting to introduce their own cryptocurrencies. So that's a huge difference. And when you have something that's centralized, they're just ripe for corruption, which is what we see in our currencies today. They're ripe with corruption because they are centralized by their very nature. A person or a committee or a company decides their fate. So think about this just very simply. Bitcoin is not decentralized. That is what makes it unique. Everything else is a scam waiting to happen. Even though they might have good intentions at the beginning, eventually it will become corrupted because there is no such thing in the history of this world as a centralized commodity or currency that has not been corrupted. It's just waiting to happen. Okay. So to me, the creation of Bitcoin in 2008, 2009 is the equivalent of Martin Luther making his Protestant declaration, his complaints about the Catholic Church. To me, it's at this level. We are starting to see, for the first time in history, a separation of our monetary system from the state. And that's exactly, of course, what Martin Luther was able to achieve. For the first time in history, we have a separation of church and state, which is what the Protestant Revolution created. No longer do we have monarchies or kings or some enlightened individual who claim they are the state, they are God. No, everyone after Martin Luther could have a personal relationship with the divine if they so wanted. It was not dictated to them by a pope or some other religious figure. It was not mediated. God was not mediated by a priest or some other intermediary to tell them, how they are doing. Anyone could potentially go to heaven. You no longer had to pay a certain fee in order to get through the gates of heaven, thanks to the Protestant Revolution. Corruption, of course, between the church and the state was rampant. Corruption within the church itself was rampant. You used to have to actually literally pay to get into heaven. If you didn't have money, you weren't getting to heaven back in the day. And of course, Martin Luther saw this as a big problem. And I think we have similar problems today where the state and the banking system, the money system are so tight, it has led to tremendous corruption around the world. And I think Bitcoin is going to break the two apart, and the twain shall never come back together again. Now, the Bitcoin white paper, which Mark alluded to earlier, this was the paper that outlined how Bitcoin was to work. It lays down all the details. It was a proposal for this new system, this new monetary system called Bitcoin, and how it was to work. And it was published by Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder, and we don't know who Satoshi is again. It was a person or a group. They call themselves Satoshi Nakamoto, and they published this white paper on October 31st, 2008. Now, does anyone know what the significance of the date October 31st is, besides being Halloween? Anyone? I'll give you the reveal here. Oops. Oh, sorry. So October 31st was the day when Martin Luther posted his complaints against the Catholic Church in 1517. Do you think it's any coincidence that Satoshi published the white paper on October 31st, 2008? Now, you can say, oh, that's just a funny coincidence. But to me, I think that was the intent of Bitcoin. It was on the level of Martin Luther's complaints against the Catholic Church, which changed the world. And I think that's what Bitcoin is really designed to do. It is designed to liberate humanity from the corruption between state and the banking system. And that's what it's here for. And if you are someone who wants to be free, who wants their children and grandchildren to be free, I think it behooves all of us to acquire Bitcoin and to hold it like our life depends upon it, like our children's lives depend upon it. This is what can liberate us from the slavery, the neo-feudal system, which is coming down the road. to me, Bitcoin is the key to liberate us all and our progeny. So this is what I do for people. I help people get on the road to Bitcoin and to participate, because we all can participate in Bitcoin. There are no restrictions. Mark, another question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, after spending a lot of time looking at this, in my opinion, it's the greatest invention of the 21st century. And it's more than just a statement of, hey, we're going to change things. It's actually a very complex invention, in my view. And I was going to point out, it looks like Iris has a question.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Yeah.
Hi. No, my question was, I put it in the chat, but I guess you didn't see it, Mark. That's fine. That was a great presentation. And I just want to know where the name Bitcoin came from.
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, there were a lot of previous attempts to create digital money. One was called Hashcash. Another was called e-gold. Another was called like a bit dollars or something like that. And so the inventors just created this name called Bitcoin. I don't know the exact, because it's never been exactly explained, but I think it conveys the idea quite well. You know, digital money, Bitcoin. But that's all I think I know. Mark, do you have any other insights there?
No, I was just thinking the same thing. It's bits of data, in a money form or a coin. I guess you could, and better than calling it bit dollar, I suppose, because it's not tied to any dollar system. It's basically just money, and money used to be coins. So
right. Yeah, and if you called it
makes sense.
if you called it bit dollar, that would be, you know, really focused on North America where dollars exist. You know, you'd be excluding Europe, Africa, Asia. You know, and this is really a coin, which is universal. You know, every country understands what a coin is. So.
Yeah, what really amazes me about this technology is the person who designed it didn't just understand cryptography, didn't just understand computer coding. He or she or a group actually had a deep understanding of the financial system and the flaws in the financial system and the things that made this financial system dysfunctional and unfair. And it's just a brilliant, I mean, it's, to me, I don't know. It's just a brilliant this work. I still think the world would be better off with gold and silver, but we're in a highly technological age where that's just not so practical anymore. And besides, we're not going to go backwards from all our digital movement. It's just not possible. So this basically gives us the wherewithal to compete against all the digital changes that are occurring in society. And I always find it interesting. There are some people out there who seem to think that Bitcoin was created by the central bankers,
CIA,
and the CIA and all this kind of stuff. And frankly, I don't think they're smart enough. I just can't. Usually these kinds of brilliant inventions come from brilliant individuals or small groups. And I would say this is just a classic example of that. And they're still trying to catch up. I did find it curious that I was listening to a talk a while back about of course, the central bank digital currency, as far as I'm concerned, is a takeoff from Bitcoin. And they're playing off of it, trying to use it to their advantage to basically enslave all of us financially. And I thought it was interesting in one of the talks that I heard by a central bank officer from Thailand saying that the main problem they were having with developing their central bank digital currency was that they couldn't hide. They were having trouble figuring out how to hide the transactions, which tells you a lot about what they're trying to do.
Yeah, we're having trouble figuring out how to steal from
the point
people.
Being, nothing in Bitcoin is hidden, which to me is just is another wonderful thing. Because imagine if we were sending all our money to Ukraine in Bitcoin, you would know exactly where it all went, or at least you'd know the addresses that it went to. Right. And from that point, you could probably figure out to some extent who the heck's really getting it. So when they say Bitcoin is fraud ridden, it's just total garbage. It's compared to what goes on in the fiat money system. So anyway, off my soapbox, but I just think it's a brilliant invention. And thanks for doing this. It was a good presentation.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead, Barb.
I have another question about when I think about how it's going to be important for future generations, maybe to have this ability to own Bitcoin, even though it's going to reach its 21 million, like you were saying. And so whenever that happens, and when is the date for that?
The year 2133.
Okay, so we won't be here, but if we have, let's say we have some altruistic tendencies, and we want to make sure that there are Bitcoin for future freedom lovers.
Mhm.
How would we do that?
We would create an inheritance plan. Yeah, exactly, because Bitcoin will probably outlive me and you, so we have to figure out how to pass it on. Otherwise, it gets lost,
Right.
and it just makes everyone else's Bitcoin more valuable. So,
Okay. So there
Yeah.
would be something in, not necessarily in Bitcoin or in the Bitcoin wallet, but in some document
exactly,
transfers
exactly.
ownership, but
Yeah.
how is that ownership done without the wallet?
Well, exactly. And because as a Bitcoiner, you become your own bank,
Uh-huh.
you have to take steps to secure and transfer ownership like a bank would. And so we have to provide instructions for your heir or heirs to be able
Right.
to access your Bitcoin. And that's what I do. I set up plans for clients.
Okay.
So that's part of what I do. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Work with you that way. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Good question though. Yeah. I like how you're thinking ahead like that.
Yeah, well, it's not for me. A lot of us want to
Mhm.
secure something for our future
Mhm.
humanity. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Great. Well, if there are no more questions, I thank you for listening and thank you for your attention. And I am available for you at bitcoinconsultant.us if you would like some help on this, or if you know someone who needs help on this.
yeah, Mark,
Thank you.
I'd like to
Good.
show this presentation to my son, who's here visiting from Taipei.
Yeah.
Would you have it available for him to watch?
Yeah. Do you want the video or do you just want the slides here?
I'd like the video because I think that would, be helpful for him to hear your presentation.
Yeah, great. Well, hopefully this video worked, and I'll be able to share this on YouTube and put it up.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Okay, everyone, be well and be free.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for everything.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Great
Mhm.
presentation.